Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for tuning in to another fantastic interview episode where we pull up a seat and chat with some of the most exciting spirit, cocktail, and bartending experts to really pick apart the topics that make you a better bartender, whether you're an industry pro or a home enthusiast. This episode, we continue our conversation with my friend Lara Victoria, who's a wine and spirits judge and consultant, an extremely talented food stylist, and, for the purposes of this interview, a sake expert. Now, as I mentioned last time around, sake is a drink I think most Westerners are aware of, but most of us really don't know too much about it. In the previous episode, we do the hard work with Lara, going into the production methods, talking about what makes sake unique from other fermented beverages, and even breaking down the various grades and classifications available on the market. So if you haven't had a chance to listen through that episode, I'd recommend it. It'll give you a much better grounding for what we talk about here in part 2. But you know what? Before we take off here, there's one other thing you're going to need, and that thing is a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Sake Martini. Now, we talk a great deal about sake cocktails in this episode, and one important thing to keep in mind is that there's not really any sake classics floating around out there in the cocktail canon, so most sake cocktails you encounter are going to be riffs on existing classics. In this case, we're doing the logical thing and using sake in place of dry vermouth because they have a similar ABV and can therefore play a similar role in a cocktail. So to make a sake martini, you'll need 2 ounces of gin. If you want bonus points for being Japanese, check out Roku Gin, which is a fairly new release. It's really delicious, uses a lot of Japanese specific botanicals. Then in addition to the gin, you're gonna need 1/2 to 1 full ounce of Junmai sake, and finally 1 dropper full of our Iki Japanese bitters by Embitterment. You can pick up a bottle of those on modernbarcart.com. You'll combine all these ingredients in a mixing glass with ice. You're going to stir for about 15 to 20 seconds until everything is well chilled and diluted. Then strain into your favorite stemmed cocktail glass and garnish with an expressed lemon twist. Your choice to keep it in the drink or discard it. I like the combination of the Iki Japanese bitters with the Junmai sake and the expressed lemon twist because the salinity and spice in the bitters, courtesy of the wasabi and the seaweed, combine with the expressed oils from the lemon peel to make up for the mildness of the sake. Usually dry vermouth is prized for its dryness and its acidity, so if you're going to take those out of the equation and swap in a different ingredient, you've got to think about other ways you can keep people's taste buds entertained. One last thing to note here is the squishiness of the sake measurement. Remember I said anywhere between a 1/2 ounce and an ounce? Well, usually you don't really want to leave that much leeway in your recipe. But I did that here because people tend to be extremely attached to their martini preferences, whether those be dry, wet, or somewhere in between. And the fact that we're working with a different mixer in sake adds a little bit of mystery as to how your palate is going to respond. So when you make this cocktail, play around. Try it with a 1/2 ounce of sake, then maybe with 3/4 of an ounce, and then if you still want more, up the ante to a full ounce. If you do get the chance to try out this little beauty, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Modern Bar Cart so we can check out your creation and see how you like it. And now, back to the interview. In this continuation of our spirited sake conversation with wine and spirits expert Lara Victoria, some of the topics we discuss include how to go about pairing sake and food, knowing that a great meal can be elevated even further by strategic sake accompaniments. Which cocktails are begging for creative riffs using sake, and how Lara and I think about constructing a cocktail when sake is one of the key ingredients. We kind of peel back the magician's curtain and give you an inside peek at how bartenders think. Sake education resources, including books, outside educational programs, and websites that can help you learn more about this fascinating category. An exciting new sake project on the horizon for Lara, where she'll be providing insider reviews of sake expressions to help consumers make informed decisions. What kind of music to listen to while sipping on sake with none other than Albert Einstein, and much, much more. Please do head on over to the show notes page for links to what we discuss, and definitely follow Lara on social media. She's a delight to learn from, and I promise that her feed will be a ray of inspiration for your brain and your palate. And with that, it's my pleasure to present part 2 of my sake-driven discussion with wine and spirits consultant and educator, Lara Victoria. But what I want to talk a little bit about now is food. Now, you're obviously very good at talking about flavor. And so I wanted to see if you had any just very basic recommendations for somebody who wanted to experiment with pairing sake and food together. Is there any types of styles that tend to pair well with things, or how do people think about that when they're planning a meal, for example?
Oh, that's such a fabulous question. Are you sure you have time for this? Because sake and food, it's like an artist studio in a blank canvas, and you can really paint a beautiful picture. So first and foremost, sake goes with just about any food. One important thing I'd love to let your listeners know is that we generally tend to think of sake just with Japanese food. But the fact is, and I'm almost, evangelical about it. The fact is that sake can go with just about any cuisine. So if you are tasting, one of my favorite ones is, a junmai with fish and chips. Believe it or not, it is amazing. Now you can take the same junmai and you can heat it if you wanted. If you desire, say it's a cold, rainy afternoon, and you just you come home and you want to have a warm cup of soup, something broth based, for example. A warm junmai is to die for with that. Or a grilled cheese sandwich, a grilled panini, something as simple as that. It doesn't have to be fancy. Will go very well with, even a warm sake or a chill sake for that matter. Now, if you want to get a little more into specialty styles of sake, like say a nigori, which is a cloudy sake, it would go really well with, say, a creamy dish. A risotto would be fabulous. Or if you had a pasta or gnocchi, oh my gosh, gnocchi with that. Amazing, just absolutely amazing. Speaking of pastas, another pairing comes to mind. You'd think of your, quintessential spaghetti and a tomato-based sauce. The umami in that would just be begging for, a match with the umami from, again, a junmai or a honjozo. Now, if you have something that's very light and silky in texture, perhaps, say, pan-seared scallops. This is when the daiginjo really shows its best. You can have its light and delicate, elegant nuances really complementing the textures, the silky textures of, say, scallops, for instance. Indian food, Malaysian food, something with spice. When I mean spice, I don't mean the hot, pungent kind of bite of chili. I mean different spices, like you've got cumin, you've got coriander, all these lovely, beautiful spices, ginger. These go so well with, if you have, again, a nigori would be fabulous. I think of a dish because it's my favorite, in an Indian dish called biryani, and that with a nigori, absolutely brilliant. So there are so many different things that you could try. I would say, actually, why don't we try this? If your listeners are thinking of having a party this weekend and you want to wow your guests, you don't have to get too fancy with what you choose, what you want to serve as your meal, but you can actually, instead of wine this time, just try pairing sakes with your entire menu. You could start with, if we have, say, guests come in and you want to serve them, how about a sparkling sake? Just greet them with a lovely glass of sparkling sake. Then for your salad course, perhaps you could do a chilled sake, depending if you're doing something light and crisp. I would say a lovely chilled ginjo would be just absolutely beautiful. If you follow that with perhaps say first course, which has say, what would you serve with the first course?
Maybe some chicken.
Okay. Yeah. So chicken, if it's grilled chicken, now let's go, with barbecue season is coming up soon. If you've got some grilled chicken, why not get something earthy to go with that, those grilled notes? And you could actually serve, like a souvlaki or something. That would be lovely. You're getting me hungry.
I know. I'm doing the same thing to myself here. Not only do I wish I had sake in front of me right now, I wish I had all of these things.
But yeah, so you could have like a lovely hanjozo would be lovely with that. I would go really well with that. Actually, I would love to pair that also with I don't know why, but when I was thinking of the salad, I was thinking of namazake. Namazake is a style of sake that's unpasteurized, and it really has this. It's called nama because it's alive still, and it has this lovely freshness on the palate, which is just brilliant with a fresh salad. And then as the night progresses, if you want to have something that's a little more heavier and substantial, there are no rules about maybe starting with one sake and a linear, kind of direction as to the next grade. You can go back and forth. You can serve warm sake and then you can serve cold sake. It is fine. There is, generally, yes, it would be nice if you would kind of follow the temperature from one way onwards, but there is no hard and fast rule. But really try that. In fact, you could try the same sake at different temperatures as well if you wish. So there is so much that you can experiment with. There is no right or wrong answer. In fact, the one thing that, actually not one, I've got a few things to say, but when it comes to, what I would recommend for people when they're trying to experiment, is have an open mind and welcome all grades and styles of sake to your palate. You owe it to yourself to discover your preference. And don't limit yourself to anyone else's opinions or choice, because taste is subjective, as we all know. And you'd be surprised as how much more you could find. But be open to other people's experiences, because you might discover something new. I would always, think of, I'm actually sorry, you got me thinking about food now, and I can't get it off my mind. It's like you could do so much. Like I'm just thinking, if you've had a hard day at work and you're coming home and you just think I'm going to stop by and pick up a shawarma wrap, for example, or you've got that chicken pot pie, you've baked and you're looking forward to that. You can always chicken pot pie. Okay. Yes, I'm thinking of that. Again, you've got something like, actually I would go with a warm sake with that one. Definitely a warm sake. A piping hot chicken pot pie and a warm sake would be just fabulous. A room temperature sake, would be fantastic with the shawarma too. So actually the shawarma, I'm thinking I'd probably do something like genshu. Genshu is another style of sake where no water is added to dilute the alcohol level. So it doesn't necessarily always mean that it is higher in alcohol content, because the doji can actually, work his production process to the point that the ultimate sake does not have so much alcohol content in the first place. So if he doesn't cut it, it's not so bad. But genshu would tend to have more of that robustness, and I think with a shawarma that would be really, really good.
Yeah. Wow. It's just so amazing to hear you talk about pairing these flavors together, because it does reinforce the complexity of it. But it also does seem like there's a lot of room. Like as long as you have one good reason for doing it in your mind, then it seems like it's a little bit less delicate than wine in that respect. Because if I'm trying to think about pairing a wine with a very spicy seafood dish, for example, there's a lot of ways I could mess up. But if you're trying to do the same thing with sake, you just need to have kind of like one good reason for picking your service temperature and your style. And as long as you've got that, then the purity of the sake just sort of is going to complement what's going on, as opposed to, like, when I think of wine, I don't think of, we don't hear wine praised as often for its purity
per se.
Yeah,
We hear it
exactly.
praised for its complexity or its
Absolutely.
nuance. And so I really do think that's what I'm pulling out of this conversation about the distinction between sake and wine, and why sake is such a beautiful pairing device, because there's just a little bit more freedom to experiment with a little less risk, I guess.
It is, and opening one bottle of junmai doesn't mean you've tasted all bottles of junmai, because again, it's the Toji's expression. It's there could be a regional expression. There's so many other things that could differentiate one junmai from the next. So, it would be very easy for me if I could say to your listeners, pick up a junmai and then try a honjozo right before it and mark the distinction. Well, that's an easy, that is sort of something which is worthwhile doing. However, the fact is, you might actually, if you're looking for that concentration, because people think that if there is alcohol added, it is diluted. It's not diluted. It is lighter, yes. Aromas. In fact, one of the reasons why some top producers of sake would add alcohol is because, as flavor compounds are not soluble in water, but yes, they are soluble in alcohol. So if you were to add alcohol, the aromatics are that much more enhanced. So if you want to make an aromatic sake, adding alcohol to it, a distilled alcohol. When I say alcohol, I should make a point. It is high strength brewers alcohol, distilled alcohol. It's not like you can just add, a shot of whiskey. That won't work. But it does make it more aromatic, and yes, it does slightly lighter in texture. So, but there are several other components to it. The water, the weight of the water. There's so many other things that can contribute to the body. So that's the beauty about sake. It's not just when you meet. My way of looking at it is it's a relationship not just with the bottle, but it's a relationship with the brewery and the brewer. What did he want to make for you or she want to make for you? How did, what was the process into it? So experiencing a bottle of sake, take your time with it and be curious about what it is. It's almost a lesson in mindfulness. Be curious about, what are the things you are experiencing. And then if, the spirit calls for it, delve into questions that, you would like to research about, like, I wonder why, I wonder where, I wonder what. And the more you look into it, the more you will learn about it, and the more you'll be interested in trying new sakes and develop your palate.
That's beautiful. I really love the mindfulness connection, and also the connection to person and place. That's really
Absolutely.
beautiful. So before we get to a couple of lightning round questions here, I want to talk about cocktails, because it seems a little complicated with sake, just because in its alcohol by volume, it inhabits this almost like it's verging on a fortified wine in some instances, but it's not quite there in terms of ABV. And there's just, as you mentioned earlier, fortified wines are made from grapes, and grapes have that acidity. So employing sake in cocktails isn't something we can necessarily just plug into like a vermouth template.
No.
So
Absolutely.
how do you think about sake in cocktails, and have you come across any really compelling sake cocktails?
Yeah, so traditionalists will not really like the idea of cocktails because, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, sake from Japan, cocktail wasn't really a thing then. However, now, the cocktail culture has kind of taken Japan by storm, and you've got the luminaries of, the cocktail world in Japan who are producing some mind-boggling cocktails, absolutely beautiful cocktails. So it is only as limited as your imagination, and as much as you want to try. I have looked into sake cocktails, so there's nothing that is actually a traditional cocktail, but it's interesting to see how many people are creating cocktails. And so there's this one website I found was very useful. It's experiencesake.com. It lists 35 sake cocktails, and I believe the writer has pulled in recipes from different sources and sort of compile a list. And it's actually a very intriguing list. There's some really neat cocktails in those. So I would certainly encourage anybody to look into those and start creating. I mean, I know my personal experience. I started creating some myself, and like last spring, I was inspired by the cherry blossoms around and created something and called it Sakura. It was just an ounce of gin and 2 ounces of junmai ginjo, and then I just followed it with a dash of cherry simple syrup, and that was just enough color for the hue for me, and just enough flavor, the cherry flavor, and enough sugar. So, you can tweak that. Again, like I said, it's something I just came up with. It's not a classic cocktail, so tweak it to suit you. In fact, Eric, I think you are a master at cocktails. I mean, you can throw in some things that will even enhance that better. So I would encourage you to try some. And actually, I had a funny, interestingly, at Christmas time, I had this, that was funny because I was thinking about what would I do. I had this 12 days of Christmas, and I thought, why not come up with a cocktail that is a sake cocktail? And I thought, why would you want to spoil a good thing like eggnog and replace it? And then I thought, well, we won't spoil it. We'll just enhance it. Let's put sake in it. And right. I did that with an Igori sake. And, it was fabulous. Sprinkle some nutmeg on it. Oh, my gosh. It was just lovely. And the last I'll actually share with you was actually a pleasant product of drunken happenstance. I had hosted this sake team dinner at my with some friends, and of course, as no one was spitting the sake that night, and as the evening progressed, it got a little more animated, and demands came to me that my friends wanted to see what was in my liquor cabinet, so opened it up and decided to create a late night cocktail, and just picked up. We had some leftover honjozo and a Saint-Germain, the elderflower liqueur, and then I had some ginger bitters running around, and so I just kind of put them together, and it was surprisingly delicious. It was so delicious, and everyone was like, "Oh, Lara, you've got to make this into something." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it's here, it's for you." And they said, "Let's call it." And they were rather drunk, so the names were not very pleasant. But so there's naming rights are up for grabs. If any of your listeners want to come up with a name for that, or you for that matter, there you go. So. Yeah, it's more on I think cocktails with sake is we are riding that wave where it will be a mainstay, and we might actually come up with some classic ones, and I think you have the responsibility to do that, Eric, because that's your domain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so just off the top of my head, so the way that I think about employing sake in a cocktail, and I've done it very, very occasionally. I like to think about the basic tastes, and then I like to think about the overall ABV of the cocktail. So let's start with tastes, right? So sake tends to have, when you really get to know a sake and you really pick up the bottle and say, okay, like you were mentioning earlier, the lychee, like, oh, this particular bottle just has a beautiful lychee characteristic. That's something that you can kind of build the cocktail around. And so if I were thinking about that, I'd say, okay, well, this sake has a really nice lychee characteristic, but it's not particularly acidic. So what I would try and build into this cocktail would be a little bit of acidity. I'd probably throw in a little bit of bitterness if it was, on the boozier side. So if, let's say I was going to pair this sake with the lychee characteristic with a really nice Japanese whiskey, then maybe what I might throw in is I might instead of making a classic Manhattan ratio with an ounce of sweet vermouth, what I might do is I might substitute a half ounce of sake
with a half ounce of dry vermouth, and then throw in maybe some lavender or orange bitters, just to play up some of the. It would all depend on the base Japanese whiskey I was using to kind of guide which bitters I'd want to highlight that. But basically, what I've just done is I've created something that's like a Manhattan. It's like a dry Manhattan, but it's got that little lychee note, and then I'll select my bitters to kind of play off of that. And because I've kind of inserted the sake into a template that already exists, right, the template of the Manhattan, I don't need to worry too much about there being too much alcohol in there, because the end ABV is not going to be so alcoholic that it's going to throw off the flavor of it. So I can just kind of treat that like a Manhattan with the addition of that nice little lychee note courtesy of the sake. So that's just an example of like how I would maybe approach creating a sake cocktail, starting with that base note that I want to add to complement something else out there. So that's one way I think about it.
No, actually, it's lovely to hear you speak about how you build a cocktail. So it actually brings it to life. And I loved when you said, lychee, and then you kind of complement it with lavender. That I think it would be a fabulous kind of I can just imagine, and I can't wait to try that. In terms of the sake, so one question may come up in terms of what kind of sake do I use for your cocktail. Now, I personally think if you use something like a daiginjo, that would be a waste, because it is so light, so elegant. It needs to be, it's so beautiful. It needs to be appreciated on its own. And quite frankly, it really, I don't think, would contribute to a cocktail as well as something with a little bit more body that has room for another spirit to come in. So something like more on the Honjozo level, a Genshu would be a fabulous idea for me, a fabulous kind of choice, I would think. On the Junmais, because you already have, a Junmai has no added distilled alcohol, as we know, so it still has some body that it can actually share with another spirit with it. So these are just things that I might keep in mind. And also, if you want a little bit of, say, bubble to your sake, there's always sparkling sakes to consider. And if it's a creamy sake, nigori sake would be a good choice.
Right.
Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. And with sparkling sakes, that's a really easy kind of template to just use sparkling sake in anything that ends in Royale, right? So I'm thinking like a Kir Royale would be absolutely lovely with some sparkling sake.
Yes.
You might want to just my only little piece of warning on the sparkling sake in a Royale format cocktail would probably be to just keep in mind that sparkling sake is not necessarily always going to be as dry as a champagne or a cava or a prosecco. So you might want to trick your palate or your guest's palate by adding something like an expressed lemon twist in there, where it's not going to play the role of acidity, but it's going to give your palate something else to think about, where the acidity might otherwise be playing a role. So just keep in mind that's probably the one pitfall I can think of for using sparkling sake in place of a sparkling wine.
And the other one thing that I noticed with sparkling, like the PSI, it's not as, you probably have to drink it right away. It doesn't hold as bubble as well. It can mostly, I would say. But the one thought that came to mind, and you made a very good point about, adding the lemon, that also brings in that lovely acidity. What is your take on, like, say, a rim, a spice rim or a salt rim to kind of complement that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Rimming is a little bit labor intensive for home bartenders, but I absolutely, in looking at this list of sake cocktails that you just mentioned, I pulled it up, and there's certainly a couple in there that have a little bit of spice added, and I think adding a bit of spice to the rim is a great option. If you've considered your other stuff, I would tend to do that with a clear spirit cocktail where we're adding sake to something like a gin or a vodka. Having that spice rim would be a really nice feature with that, I think, especially if it was shaken and served in a really nice chilled glass.
Okay, so you need to start a mixologist school, and you need to save a spot for me, because I totally want to come and learn from you. It's great. It's brilliant. I love the way your mind thinks in terms of, kind of adding and building into creating a cocktail, because as you're saying it, I can literally taste it, and I'm thinking, wow, this is fabulous. This is really good. So
yeah, well, that's the joy of what we both get to do for a living, right? We just get to talk about flavor, and sometimes somebody writes us a check.
Yes, that's true.
So Lara, let's do this. Let's jump into some lightning round questions.
Okay.
And the first one that we like to ask, and I know that you're a wine person, but I presume that you've got a little bit of cocktail experience, is what is your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something you've been more recently obsessed with?
Oh, well, yeah, you got me there. When it comes to cocktails, I'm actually a very uncomplicated person, and I would just give me a rum and Coke and I'm happy. And I usually don't drink Coke, but I do it just for the rum. So yeah, I'm happy with that. But, recently I was presented with a cocktail that I actually was very interested in. It was called Velvet Jukebox. So I went home and I looked up the recipe. And it includes manzanilla sherry, so I knew that much. So I actually looked it up, and I found the recipe on sherry.wine. It's the official website of the Consejo I can't say that again. Okay. So I found it on sherry.wine, which is the official website of the Consejo Regulador de los Vinos de Jerez y Manzanilla. So what the recipe includes is 1 ounce of manzanilla sherry, 1 ounce of blanco tequila, half an ounce of sloe gin. I know. Half an ounce of ginger syrup, and 2 dashes of cayenne tincture. We're talking about spice this time. I don't know how it seems like that's the flavor. So you shake everything basically in a cocktail shaker with ice, and then pour it into a chilled coupe and garnish it with a grapefruit twist. That's what the recipe calls for. Yes. And so, by the way, this website also has recipes for the ginger syrup and the tincture. So if anyone wants to try it at home and, get a little more creative, I think this is a great one to start with.
I think that's fantastic. I love when people create a really well-balanced cocktail by splitting a bunch of things. So they split the sugar between the sloe gin and the ginger syrup. They split the, I guess, citrus notes. We could call it acidity, but I'll generalize to citrus notes. They split that between the manzanilla sherry and the grapefruit twist. And oh man, that's just a beautiful, beautiful cocktail. It's the Velvet Jukebox.
Yes, that's what it's called. So it might be a trending thing now. I hope it does, because it's really great. And you're right, the manzanilla sherry just gives it that, has that kind of a briny note, a savory note to it, and it's light and dry, so it does not add any sweetness at all. And exactly like you said, the gin, the sloe gin, and the ginger is just, and of course tequila. How can you go wrong with that? So yes, it's a great cocktail.
Beautiful. All right, so next question. If you were a cocktail tool or ingredient, what would you be?
I'd be a muddler. I just love introducing new flavors and creating new matches, as you can tell, obviously, with food and wines and spirits. And, when there is an acquaintance, I like to bring it closer and do more. And I think that's what a muddler does. It just takes, different, whether it is textures, whether it is ingredients, and actually integrates them somehow. And I love to bring people to new flavors and new tastes. And hence I'm a muddler.
Yeah, it's the great integrator of the cocktail world. It's or activator, I should say. It takes what's hidden in the ingredients, whether that's a beautiful juice or an essential aromatic oil, and it just activates that. So yeah, that's fantastic, and I think that really fits in well with your food styling. We'll at the end of the episode, we'll definitely tell folks how to follow you on all the social media platforms so that they can see your beautiful photography. But I have really enjoyed following you over the past couple months and seeing just like the imagination and that kind of like that activation that you do for those beautiful photo shoots.
Thank you.
So next question, if you could have a cocktail or a glass of sake or a glass of wine or whatever it is, if you could have a drink with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you do? What would you drink? Just paint us a picture.
Okay, so get ready for this. I'd be on a deck of a blue-domed white house hugging the slopes of Ia on the northwestern tip of Santorini in Greece. And there, I'd be picking the brain of none other than Albert Einstein. I am fascinated with that human being. And I know he's not here with us, but if I can dream, hey, you said dead or alive, and he's my man. Besides his brilliance in science, he was also such an accomplished musician and an artist in many ways. He was also a very involved citizen of his time, so I'm sure chatting with him would be so textured in so many different fields, and it would make for such good conversation. I've always, as I mentioned, been inspired by him since I was a child, so it would be absolutely fantastic to be able to spend some time with him. The beverage, I would like to say sake. Not just because today's podcast is about sake, but really I would love to introduce him to sake. Perhaps he knew a bit, but during his time, given the political arena, I'm not sure how much sake he may have had access to. But so I would love to pour him some sake. Interestingly, it's said that Einstein actually did not care much for alcohol. So, well, too bad for him. All the better for me. I'll have sake, his share. But I would love to invite him into a conversation about sake. I mean, things like we were talking about, the whole phenomenon of parallel fermentation I'd love to see his take on it and in what he found fascinating about it. Maybe there are things about it that I have not had a chance to consider. It would be great to get his perspective. I think I would serve moussaka. You got me thinking about food, and moussaka comes to mind now. I think that would be a good choice for dinner since we're in Greece as well.
Oh yeah.
And I would have to make sure that the sake was there for an umami-rich junmai for that. I would love a good junmai. As for music, I'd start, I think like wines, food, and spirit, you pair them not just with food, but I see that happen with music. Music inspires me for my choices as well. So for music, I'd start with Bach, just because, I want to please Einstein. Apparently that was he adored the music of Bach. But I think eventually I can hear the sweet sound of Thelonious Monk streaming in. Perhaps after he leaves. I don't know if Einstein and Thelonious Monk would actually be a match, but who knows? It could. And just like cocktails, you don't know until you try it. So I just play it because that's what I want to do.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I have been recently dabbling would even be too strong a word, but trying to acquaint myself with physics a little bit more. Been listening to some podcasts that kind of explain certain things, and I don't have the kind of mind that works that way, but it really, I think a conversation about beautiful fermented beverages or spirits is great to have with somebody who has that intimate kind of molecular understanding of the way that the universe works. And I think that's just a lovely choice to, especially talking about things like parallel fermentation and all that.
Yeah, because, another thing that I think I thought of parallel fermentation, I thought of Einstein together, because I think his mind worked parallel in so many different faculties at the same time. He had that, I think for me, I take a subject and I kind of follow through with it. But it seemed like he could take a subject and follow through at the same time while he was following through other subjects. So in many ways, he is like a sake in terms of, when sake has its production of its process, which is parallel fermentation. I think his brain was a product of such parallel, faculty. So yeah, Beautiful. It would be great to be.
So we've talked about kind of the basics of sake. For somebody who might want to get a little bit more technical, are there any books that have been particularly influential or enjoyable for you on the subject of sake?
So sadly, most of the books are in Japanese. There are, however, a few books in English. And if you ask for technical books, the books can get really technical. So for a first timer who's trying to understand sake, throwing too much technicality may actually throw them off. But that said, I would highly recommend John Gottner's The Sake Handbook. It's an easy read and it has Gottner's beautiful and delightful tone that always breaks down. He has the capacity to break down technical aspects of sake into easy to understand chunks for the English speaker. So I think that would be a really good book to dig into while you're sipping a cup of delicious sake yourself. And that said, I've noticed a few more new books coming up on Amazon that I've actually ordered and are currently in the mail to me. So do look them up. If you just go sake and books on Amazon, you'll find some. But I would, for now, for starters, if you just wanted something to get introduced into the world of sake, the Sake Handbook by John Gottner is a lovely way to start.
Great. We will link to that in the show notes. And kind of like as a part two to that question, if you could give any advice to somebody who's just starting to learn about sake, kind of starting to test the waters, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to have an open mind and welcome all grades of sake and all styles of sake to your palate. You know, you really, as I mentioned earlier, you owe it to yourself to discover your preference. Next would be don't limit yourself. You know, it's like just because someone says, if someone seems to be an authority and says this is what you should drink, I mean, it's a good direction, but follow your own palate. Taste is subjective, so don't limit yourself to anyone's opinion or choice. You know, yours is what really guides you. And I would highly recommend that someone sign up for a sake course. You know, like find what sake courses are available near you and certainly look them up. I know, there's lovely schools around the world, the Sake Sommelier Association. There's, the Japan, in Japan there is the Japan Sake and Social Association that also offers some courses. They have what they call the Kikisakeshi program, which is basically a sake sommelier program. And of course, WSET, I cannot say enough about it. It's my alma mater, and I absolutely stand by that. So they are a great place to learn about sake. Remember that sake pairs with more than just Japanese food. You know, pour it alongside anything you whether it's takeout food or whether it's a finely prepared meal for someone you want to impress. Sake will always be by your side. It's never a diva. It's always a gracious companion. So feel confident and feel empowered to actually try new things. And last but not the least, I've noticed sake tends to taste better with company. So invite your friends and do a sake tasting. You know, try something new. Like maybe have each of them get a bottle of sake, and you guys can try something like a blind tasting and do a nice reveal and experiment with different sakes. It'll be a great way to spread the love of sake as well.
Well, Lara, this has been absolutely tremendous, and I've been strategically ignoring a couple of things that you brought up, just like unfiltered sake and unpasteurized sake. So we've covered a portion of the iceberg, but there is still a decent portion of the iceberg that is still below the waterline. So I think we are absolutely within our rights to say, hopefully in the future we can put together maybe a sake level 2 interview where we get into some of these even more complex things. But I think this was a great introduction. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to kind of introduce us to sake and all the things it can do for us. And I want to give you this chance to tell everybody where they can say hi to you in the digital space, online or via social media. And I believe you also have a website coming out in the near future. So can you share just all those lovely details with us?
I certainly would love to. But before I do, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share my love of sake with your listeners. And I can see, I really appreciate the amount of detail and the amount of work you put into to make sure this happens. So I'm very, very grateful to you for that. In terms of how to get a hold of me, I love receiving emails or people contacting me. So email addresses, I've got a few, but the easiest one to remember is basically my name. My name is Lara Victoria. And so my email is lara@laravictoria.com. And it's Lara without a U. So it's Lara. It's just that. I have people who will spell it, put a Laura. It is just Lara@laravictoria.com.
You're like the Tomb Raider. Lara Croft.
Oh, well, that Lara. Oh, there could be Lara from Dr. Zhivago. Think of that. That was the inspiration my parents actually thought of. And then, of course, my Instagram handle is laravictoria.cheers. And as for websites, of course, I have laravictoria.com that showcases my creative work in food and beverage alcohol. And then there is crewclasse.ca, and that is CRUCLASSE.ca, which is about wine, spirits, and sake education. And then the new website, I'm so excited. Well, I've had it for a while, but I've been developing it, and I'm almost ready to just release it. It is all about sake, just sake, and everything to do with sake. So one of the interesting things is it will also have ratings about sake. So if you're not sure, and when I'll tell you right now, when I say ratings, if I rate a sake that's higher than another, it's not because I like it more than the other. As you know, this is what I do in terms of judging wine, spirits, or sake. So I take the subjectivity out of it, and the rating would precisely be how well that sake is made, or how well it presents itself for what it is. So, if it is let's just say a namazake, how good of a namazake it is. So that would, just because it has a very high score doesn't mean it is better than, say, another ginjo. It's just maybe that ginjo could be better in its own category. So it'll be actually a fun website to check out. I'm really, really excited about it. And I got a great name for it. It's called Sake Sensation. And it's just a fun play on words. Sensation is actually sensei. SENSEI, as in a teacher. And it's all about sake knowledge. So do check it out. And I'd welcome everyone's thoughts on it. And if you want to contribute something to it, then, by all means, do let me know. The website will be sakesensation.com. So SAKESENSEITION.com. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Yeah, that's super exciting. We'll definitely throw links to all of that in the show notes so that folks can check you out on social media. And when it goes live, all you got to do is send me a quick email, and we will blast it out to all of our listeners and social media followers. And is it going to go live with any reviews on there, or are you going to kind of add those in as you go?
There will be some reviews, but I will keep that going. It will be an ongoing process. In fact, maybe when we do if we do our sake 2.0, we can talk about, the one thing is in terms of, the same sake next year may taste different because it's a different release. So I will keep that updated every time there is a new release, and based on what is supplied to me and what I can have access to, I will review and update even previously reviewed sakes on that. So it will be live, yes.
Awesome. That is so exciting, Lara. And for everyone out there, you can head over to the show notes page at modernbarcart.com/podcast to check out all of the stuff that we talked about with relevant links. And Lara, just thank you so much.
Oh, Eric, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Kanpai.
Kanpai. Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly.
This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, sake pairing and cocktailing advice from Lara Victoria, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.